Cam Nicholson's my name. I'm a consultant with Nicon Rural Services, just out of Geelong. Been working on the Grain and Graze program for 13 years. Well, as you could probably imagine, it's a huge field. We probably group it into managing feed sources, and we've got 4 different feed sources there that we've really looked into. The obvious one that most people associate with grain and graze is grazing winter crops, and we've done extensive work over 10 or 15 years in that space. Key message out of that probably is that yes, you can get some very good high quality feed early in the season, but if you want to avoid grain yield losses, which can occur through grazing, then there are some recommendations of sowing early, grazing early, and maximising the recovery time between grazing and flowering. And so that's one area of feed source. The second area would be in our stubbles, and we've done some extensive studies on looking at stubbles, and stubbles ain't stubbles. With the efficiency of some of the herbicides we're using now and some of the machinery, some stubbles have no grazing value in them at all, and so we're better not to put an animal in there in the first place, but others do, and we've come up with some guidelines there about what are the strategic points that you look at in a stubble and when assessing a stubble to know if it's got grazing value or not, and that's for cereals and for legumes as well. Third area would be related to using pasture fodders or typical pasture sort of species in a crop rotation. So unlike thinking of pulses as being a legume in the rotation, we're thinking about things like subclover, balansa clover, arrowleaf clover and so on, and some of the grasses as well. And we've found that they can be a very useful fit in the farming system, give us multiple benefits of weed control, nitrogen fixation, organic matter into the ground and that sort of thing. The downside with it is that we've found actually in a lot of cases where we think the legumes are fixing nitrogen, they're not. So we've actually been surprised that how little nitrogen they've been fixing in some cases, possibly due to residual herbicides from previous crop rotations which we hadn't considered. And then the fourth one is just looking at very early sowing of winter crops, either in springtime and using them as a summer fodder, or using crops with the high vernalisation, sowing them in Feb, March, April when we get opportunistic rain, which gives us early feed and then allows us to take them through for a grain crop later on. I said in my talk, it's hard enough to do if you're in a pasture situation when you've got a more predictable feed source. It's very hard when you've got 4 different feed sources of different qualities that come and go very quickly, or the opportunity to use them comes and goes very quickly. And with that complexity throws up a whole lot of challenges. Challenges in actually having the brain power to sort of put all that together and how we think about making the decisions around what we do. It just becomes, we talk about being a more complex problem. And when it's a more complex problem, then your intuition tends to have a greater influence over the decisions you make than just the facts and figures. But I'm very excited by what's on the horizon, particularly in a livestock operation. I think things like virtual fencing, which isn't far away, walkover weighing, a whole lot of the electronic stuff is the livestock industry about where the cropping industry was 20, 25 years ago, I reckon. So we've got opportunity to be very clever in the big data sort of field. I've also been surprised by the innovation in some people now that don't want to own livestock, but have found arrangements with people that do have livestock to actually offer their feed source in different ways. Infrastructure, I know of people that collectively have bought a good wool shed between them and they all share it and they all sort of rent that out on a different basis, and the same with yards and things like that. So I think the historic sort of infrastructure challenges that we see, I reckon in the next 5 or 10 years we'll find some very clever ways of overcoming them. I gave an example of, if you graze a crop and you might lose a bit of yield, you can actually say, well, I've lost 200 kilos, this is worth X amount of money to me. The livestock side of it's a lot harder because while they're on the crop, your pastures have grown a bit more. When your livestock come out there, then your lambing percentage might be a bit better, your supplementary feeding might be a bit lower, the wool cut might be a bit higher and so on. And the milk the animals produce because they're in slightly better condition. So the livestock side of it's much harder to get a proper handle on, a true handle on, rather than just thinking, oh, they graze that for 3 weeks, it's worth X amount of money to me. But when we've done the full modelling and we get the system to work well and to be integrated right, then yeah, there is some gains, really big gains to be made with that. Yeah, risk has been a big one when farmers have been determining what level of livestock or crop they want in the system. We've certainly found if you bring livestock into it, you reduce your downside risk, so your chances of making big losses compared to if it was crop only. But that potentially comes at a cost, and that cost is that in a really good year for cropping, by not having as much crop, you actually lose some money. So you tighten the risk profile if you bring livestock into the system usually, and that's you reduce the downside, but you also reduce your potential upside when conditions are favourable.